1940, a Ford Motor Company assembly plant on the outskirts of Port Elizabeth, South Africa. A vehicle rolls off the production line and into the sun. It is squat, angular, and wrapped in flat plates of locally milled steel. 4 road wheels sit beneath a body that looks less like a fighting machine and more like an armoured delivery van. A cylindrical turret crowns the roof, mounting 2 rifle-caliber Vickers machine guns, weapons that would struggle to stop a truck, let alone a tank. The whole thing weighs barely 6 tons. Its engine is a commercial Ford V8, the same motor found in civilian sedans. Its chassis is a shortened 3-ton truck frame. Its 4-wheel drive conversion kit was designed by a company in Indianapolis that had never built a weapon of war. It looked improvised. It looked desperate. British officers who inspected it called it clumsy. It would go on to fight across East Africa, North Africa, the Middle East, Greece, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. Nearly 5,750 would be built in 4 years. Its crews would rip off their own turrets and bolt on captured enemy guns to make it lethal. The last examples would see combat more than 30 years after they left the factory. Its name was the Marmon-Herrington armoured car, and it was the vehicle that fought Britain's wars when Britain had nothing else to send. To understand why a South African factory was building armoured cars for the British Empire in 1940, you need to understand the scale of Britain's equipment crisis. When war broke out in September 1939, South Africa's entire armoured vehicle inventory consisted of 2 obsolete Crossley Scout cars and 2 medium tanks. Britain, overwhelmed by its own rearmament, could not spare a single armoured car for a distant dominion. The Union Defence Force calculated it needed at least 67 armoured cars for a single reconnaissance battalion. After the fall of France, that number ballooned to roughly 1,000. The solution was a genuinely multinational engineering effort. The chassis came from Ford Canada, based on a commercial truck platform. The critical 4-wheel drive conversion kits came from the Marmon-Herrington Company of Indianapolis, founded by Walter Marmon and Arthur Herrington, an ex-military engineer who specialized in all-wheel drive truck conversions. Armour plate was produced domestically by the South African Iron and Steel Industrial Corporation. Armament came from Britain. Final assembly was handled jointly by Dorman Long and the Ford Motor Company of South Africa. The vehicle's official designation was the South African reconnaissance car, but British troops, seeing the Marmon-Herrington badge on each front wheel hub, applied the name that stuck permanently. The vehicle itself was a masterpiece of practical compromise. The Mark II, the first variant with 4-wheel drive, weighed around 6 tons and carried a crew of 4. Its armour was 12mm at the front and 6mm on the sides, enough to stop rifle bullets and shell splinters, but nothing heavier. The Ford V8 produced around 95 horsepower, giving a top speed of roughly 80 km per hour on roads and a range of over 300 km. Primary armour on the Middle East variant was a .55-inch Boys anti-tank rifle with a coaxial Bren gun. The Mark III, designed by Captain D.R. Ryder, introduced a shorter wheelbase for better agility, fully welded construction, and a larger octagonal turret. 2,630 Mark IIIs were built, making it the most produced variant. The Mark IV abandoned the truck chassis entirely in favour of a purpose-built monocoque hull with a rear-mounted engine, and finally a QF 2-pounder anti-tank gun capable of genuine armour penetration. But it arrived too late for the desert campaign that had driven its development. Every number tells a story. 12mm of frontal armour meant any anti-tank rifle could punch through it. 80 km per hour meant crews could outrun what they could not outfight. 300 km of range meant deep desert patrols without resupply, and the Ford V8 meant any mechanic with civilian training could keep it running. Before we get into where this vehicle actually fought, if you're enjoying this deep dive into wartime improvisation and British military engineering, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. The Marmon-Herrington's first war was in East Africa. When Italy declared war on the 10th of June 1940, Mussolini had roughly 200,000 men in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Italian Somaliland. Lieutenant General Sir Alan Cunningham's East Africa force launched its offensive in January 1941. Because Cunningham had no tanks, the Marmon-Herringtons were pressed into service as surrogate armour against Italy's antiquated L3 tankettes. They proved adequate. South African forces captured Italian Somaliland by late February, struck north into Abyssinia, and reached Addis Ababa by the 6th of April. But it was North Africa that defined the vehicle. The 4th South African Armoured Car Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel D.S. Newton King, arrived in Egypt in June 1941 and became the only South African unit to serve with the legendary 7th Armoured Division, the Desert Rat. During Operation Crusader in November 1941, their scouts led the 7th Armoured Division through the frontier wire on the night of the 17th. 1348, on the 19th of November, they spotted enemy aircraft at Sidi Rezeg, triggering the assault that captured 19 Axis planes on the ground. ground. 4 days later came catastrophe. On the 23rd of November, a day the Germans called Totensonntag, the 5th South African Brigade was destroyed at Sidi Rezeg by the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions. The Transvaal Horse Artillery fired over open sights as they were overrun. Only 5 of 24 guns survived. At the Battle of Gazala in May 1942, the 4th South African Armoured Car Regiment was the first unit to spot Rommel's flanking advance at dawn on the 27th of May. Despite accurate reporting, the speed of the German hook was devastating. By 8:30 in the morning, the 7th Armoured Division headquarters had been overrun and General Messervy captured. He later escaped. The fall of Tobruk on the 21st of June was the darkest day. 12,722 South Africans entered captivity. The 4th and 6th Armoured Car Regiments were so depleted they had to be amalgamated into a single combined regiment under Lieutenant Colonel Reeves Moore. At El Alamein, this combined regiment received an extraordinary mission: break through at the junction of the German 15th Panzer Division and 90th Light Division to simulate a massive armoured breakthrough. On their third attempt, at 6:30 in the morning on the 4th of November 1942, A and B squadrons burst behind enemy lines, creating havoc among Axis administrative units during the pursuit across Libya. What made these engagements remarkable was not the vehicle, it was what its crews did to it. The practice of mounting captured enemy weapons became the Marmon-Herrington's defining characteristic. Crews stripped off their factory turrets and bolted on Italian 20mm breeder autocannons, German 3.7cm Pak 36 guns, Italian 47mm anti-tank guns, and even salvaged QF 2-pounders pulled from destroyed British tanks. By February 1942, at least one vehicle per troop carried a captured anti-tank gun. They traded protection for firepower and gained a lower silhouette as a bonus. Beyond Africa, the vehicle served in Greece, where it proved inadequate against the Wehrmacht. In the Dutch East Indies, 49 Mark IIIs were purchased but arrived in poor condition, and most were captured by the Japanese before they could be armed. In Malaya, 175 Mark IIIs deployed with Australian and British forces during the fighting of 1941 and 42. On paper, every rival outclassed it. The Italian autoblinder AB-41 carried a 20mm autocannon, up to 40mm of turret armour, and dual driver positions. The German SDKFZ-222 mounted a 20mm cannon with better optics. Among Allied vehicles, the Daimler armoured car, purpose-built with a 2-pounder gun and thicker armour, was the decisive upgrade. Yet the Marmon-Herrington had something none of these possessed: availability. In the critical years of 1940 to 42, it was the only armoured car the British Empire could field in quantity. 5,746 were built in total across all marks, from a country with no prior armoured vehicle tradition. The vehicle was eventually replaced because better machines became available: the Daimler, the Staghound, the Humber Mark IV, and because its primary theatre, North Africa, was won by May 1943. Remarkably, the last Marmon-Herrington saw combat not in the Second World War, but during the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in July 1974, more than 30 years after production ended. Survivors sit today at the Bovington Tank Museum, the Ditsong National Museum in Johannesburg, and the Athens War Museum. 1940, Port Elizabeth. A flat-plated, undergunned, thin-skinned armoured car rolls off a converted truck assembly line in a country that had never built a military vehicle. It had 12mm of armour that any anti-tank rifle could punch through. It had machine guns that could not stop a half-track. It had a commercial engine, a truck chassis, and a four-wheel drive system designed by a company that made bus conversions in Indiana. And yet, it worked. It worked in the dust of Italian Somaliland and the mountains of Abyssinia. It worked at Sidi Rezeg and Gazala and El Alamein. It worked because its crews refused to accept its limitations, ripping off turrets and bolting on enemy guns until the vehicle became something its designers never imagined. Nearly 6,000 were built. The last ones fought 3 decades after the factories closed. The Marmon-Herrington was not elegant, not powerful, British, but it was there when nothing else was. And that is not luck. That is the difference between a